Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So what I want to do for the next hour or so is talk to you about inheritance. That's the main topic on the agenda for today. The other topic that was in the prep work was graphical user interfaces. I'm actually not planning to talk too much about that stuff today. If that is something that interests you, it is a vast, very large topic. So I could not do it justice in a short period of time. I would encourage you to either talk to me about that afterwards, or of course take the initiative to dive in and start learning about some of that stuff yourself. It's usually not particularly tricky, so it's just there's just a lot of it. I'd rather focus today on inheritance, and I want to add some more features to this banking app that we've been working on. But before we get there, let's talk about inheritance a little bit. Can somebody explain to me what inheritance actually is? What is inheritance? Yeah. Yeah, I like that you use that word hierarchy. That's exactly what it is. It's a way of putting classes in a hierarchy, a list of levels. What's the benefit? What do we gain from using inheritance in our code? What's the advantage? What's the main benefit? Yeah. Yeah, we gain reusability, so I can reuse my code in many different places without having to write it over and over and over again. Yeah. Yeah, so polymorphism is another big one. So what's the definition of polymorphism then?
It is just an object that has
Sure. So if I'm using inheritance, that means that I'm taking a base class, right, and I'm inheriting that into some, we call that, what do we call that when we inherit from a base class? What's that other class called? A subclass or a derived class, you might hear me call it as well. So in the case of a subclass, I can treat it either as the subclass directly, or I can also treat it as the base class, right? I have the ability to treat it as either of those types, which goes back to a very important concept with object-oriented programming. When I define a class, I'm really defining a type. That's what a class is a type definition. The same thing is true with inheritance, with subclasses. I'm defining a type. Polymorphism says that I can use any of the types that might apply through inheritance to my particular objects. So we'll see some of that a little bit later on today. Hopefully see some examples of how that might be useful. So let's move back to our banking app. I have this account class that we've been working on for the last couple weeks. And way back when we started this thing, we talked about how there are different types of accounts. There are checking accounts and savings accounts. Those are the two biggest types of accounts that you're going to run into at a bank, right? And so what I want to do today is actually create those classes. I want to create a checking account and a savings account. Now, there's a relationship between checking accounts and savings accounts, right? They have some things in common, right? So what are the things that they actually have in common between the two? I saw somebody just point at the screen. Yeah, that's exactly right. This stuff, I can deposit, I can withdraw from both, right? I can transfer money, right, if I want to, from checking accounts and savings accounts. So they do share the basics in common with one another. What are some of the differences then between checking accounts and savings accounts? Yeah. You can't write a check off of a savings account. Third-party transfers. You're already digging way deeper than I intended to. But you're absolutely correct, of course. Yeah. Savings accounts can accrue interest. Some checking accounts can as well, but I think usually a savings account is going to be the primary interest accruing account, whereas we're going to treat a checking account as not having any interest at all. No interest can be accrued via checking account. Any other differences between the two? So a savings account generally requires some sort of a minimum balance. In fact, we have that here, right? We have this minimum balance applied on our account class. A checking account, there's usually not a minimum balance, or if there is a minimum balance, it's usually a lot lower than a savings account. In fact, with a checking account, we can usually do overdraft if we want to. Although they charge you a fee for that typically, if you overdraft your checking account. With a savings account, that's not possible. They won't let you overdraw your savings account. And also, typically, some other differences are with a savings account, you're usually limited in how many times you can withdraw from that account in a certain period of time. I don't remember what the actual number is, but you can't just keep withdrawing from your savings account. There's only a certain number of times you can do that. Of course, all of this varies depending on the bank and who you're setting these accounts up with. But I want to try and implement some of those features today. So I want to implement a checking account that allows us to do, overdrafting and maybe charges a fee, right? Or maybe we have overdraft protection, which allows us to, do a little bit of an overdraft without incurring a fee, perhaps. And then I also want to implement a savings account, which will allow us to compute interest and maybe limit the number of withdrawals on a particular savings account. So I want to use the features that I have here, right? I want my checking accounts and my savings accounts to be able to do withdrawals and deposits, right? So I want to use the features that I have in this account class, but I don't want to have to type them all out again. I don't want to have to rewrite all this code. So this is a good time for us to use inheritance. What's the relationship between the base class and the subclass when we're talking about inheritance? What do we say? Yeah. Is the relationship we're going to be looking for, right? I love breaking these things down into relationships. It helps me to actually say it out loud, right? A savings account is an account, right? A savings account is an account. So inheritance is a good relationship to describe the relationship between this account class and the accounts that we're about to create. So let's go ahead and do the, let's do the savings account class first, I guess. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and create my new class. I'm going to call it savings account. And it gives me this blank class. How do I inherit then from the account class? What do I need to do to tell it, oh, hey, this is actually something that I'm going to inherit from the account class? What do I say? Extends. So up here at the top, I say extends, and then the name of the class that I want to extend, account, right? So now what that means is that anything that's defined in the account class, I can access through my savings account class. Just automatically. That's all there is to it. That one little piece of code allows me to access anything from my account class, in my savings account class. It's mad at me right now. We're going to fix this in just a second, right? The rest of the class design is going to be the same as normal class design. I want to think, what fields does this need? What fields does the savings account need? What are the hazards, right? So what are the things that we need in a savings account that we don't already have in our base class? What do we need? What fields? I'm sorry? I need an interest rate. So what's a good data type for that one? A double, probably. I'll mark this private, as I usually do. Interest rate. Any other hazards you can think of? So if we're trying to limit the number of times I can withdraw, right, I need to have some way of tracking that. So what is that limit? And how many have I actually done, right? How many times have I actually withdrawn? So probably, an integer data type would be good for that one. So int max withdrawal, max withdrawals, and then maybe another one for current number, or current withdrawals, I guess. Something like that, to track how many times we've withdrawn from this particular account, this particular savings account. Anybody else think of any other hazards that we might need to incorporate with this savings account? Yeah. Yeah, so minimum balance is an interesting one, right? We have a minimum balance in our account class. We have it here. We have it marked as final, which means it's not going to change. However, we've sort of been talking about it in the sense that it can be different between different accounts. So maybe this decision that we made a week or two ago is no longer valid in that sense. Maybe I need to be able to change this minimum balance based on what kind of account it is, perhaps. So in that case, maybe I don't want this to be final, which means I should really make that not capitalized anymore by convention and get rid of this. But that also means then that I need to set this field somehow. What's responsible for setting my fields? The constructor is, right? The constructor is. So then I either have to hard code that in the constructor or I have to pass it in as a parameter. I think probably the parameter is the way to go for this one. I'll say float min balance. And then set that in my constructor. And now I have a minimum balance that I can change depending on the account. And then the last thing I need to do is actually change this guy down here. Subtract the minimum balance. Okay. Any other hazards, going back to our savings account class, any other hazards, any other fields that we need to consider here? Yeah. So overdraft protection, I think, applies more to checking accounts. Yeah, that's getting a little bit more complicated than I wanted to. You're absolutely correct. I was trying to keep things somewhat simple for today and just like charge a fee or something if you overdraft or not based on whether you have overdraft protection. So I think that would be a good feature for you to experiment with, perhaps as part of a project, making this, expanding this into a project perhaps, or it's just an exercise. Yeah. Any other hazards somebody wants to propose? All right, then we also need to think about behaviors. What are some behaviors that a savings account is going to have that a regular account isn't necessarily going to have? Well, we can take a look and see our fields sort of imply some new behaviors that we need to take into account, right? I have to compute the interest, so I have to compound the interest every so often. So that's going to be a behavior that we'll need to implement. So I'll just leave that as a comment down here. Behaviors, compounding interest. Any other behaviors that a savings account has that our regular account may not have? Yeah. Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting one. I definitely want to do this, right? But when do I want to track the withdrawals? When am I going to want to take that into account? I want that to happen when a withdrawal takes place. But I already have the code for a withdrawal, right? I already have this withdrawal method. And since I'm inheriting from this class, I can already utilize this withdrawal method if I want to. It would be nice to, excuse me, reuse this code and add in the new stuff if possible, so I don't have to just type all this out over again. So that's something that I definitely want to talk to you about. It's going to be a little tricky though, counting withdrawals. It's more of a modification of an existing behavior instead of an entirely new behavior. Right? I think this is good enough to get us started. There's one other very important method that we need to do, so I want to talk about that one first. What method am I getting at? Constructor. So let's talk about this constructor. I'll go ahead and set it up. Public savings account, right? Now I have to think about what all a savings account needs in order to do its job. And the one thing to consider is that since I'm using inheritance here, this constructor is responsible not just for these, but also for the fields that I'm inheriting from the base class. The constructor of my subclass is responsible for all of those fields, not just the ones that I'm setting in my subclass. So in terms of parameters, this list is actually going to get kind of big. perhaps, you can see I need to set all of these, right, somehow, balance, number, owner, and minimum balance. I have to take care of all of those, as well as the 3 new ones that I've got, right? So I need to start putting in the usual suspects. In fact, I'm not going to type all that out. I'm just going to come over here and copy these to make life a little easier for me. So that covers all the ones from the base class. But what about these 3 new ones? Which of these should come in as parameters? And which one of these can I just hard code to certain values? Any ideas? Yeah. I could potentially hard code the minimum balance. So in that sense, right, I wouldn't take in the minimum balance here. I would take this off the list, right? We could do that, sure. What about these fields, though? Where am I going to get these from? Am I going to take those in as parameters, or am I going to hard code these in? Or some mixture of the two? I'm sorry? Current withdrawals is going to start out at 0, right? So that one I can just hard code in the constructor. What about the other 2? Is it government mandated? I'm not. It is. So that one I could also hard code in, right? I could also hard code that one in. I think it's like 6 or something per month, something like that. What about interest rates? Now, technically that could change, but the interest rate hasn't changed in a very long time, so I don't know. I mean, it technically could change, so perhaps we should take that in as a parameter. I'm sorry? A class variable, I'm not sure. Well, checking accounts oftentimes don't have an interest rate, so this doesn't necessarily apply to all accounts. At least the way I'm designing it, I'm saying it's not going to apply to my checking accounts, just my savings account. If you disagree with that design decision, then putting this in the base class is an option, certainly. Yes. But I'm going to take it in as a parameter, so I'll say double interest rate. Okay. And now I have to somehow set these things, right? I have to set these fields, but there's a special way that we do this. In fact, we have to remember that a savings account is an account. So actually what I want to do is I just want to create an account. I just want to create an account like normal. Well, not exactly like normal, it's a little different. And then take care of any of the differences between the two. So there's a special way that we do that within our subclasses. How do I create an account? What's the word I'm looking for to create an account to use to take care of the first few sets of fields? Super is what we're looking for, right? So if I say super, what am I actually doing? I'm calling the constructor of the base class. I'm calling this method right here. I'm calling this constructor. When I say super, it looks at what I'm inheriting from, finds the constructor, and uses that. So that gets me most of the way there. I need to pass in the parameters, so balance, number, owner, oops. And then we said maybe we can just hard code in what the minimum balance is for our savings account, right? Min balance is the last parameter, so I don't know, 500 bucks. So that takes care of those fields, but I'm still on the hook for these new ones, so I just have to set those as normal. So with the interest rate, right, I still have to say this dot interest rate equals interest rate. And for max withdrawals and current withdrawals, I have to specify those as well. In fact, if max withdrawals is, always the same thing, like it's never going to change, ever, unless the government changes it, which I don't know how likely that is. This one, I think, is a candidate for calling it just a final, right? Just calling it a final value, kind of the way that we had min balance before. Just set it to be always 6, and that's one less thing we have to worry about. And then with current withdrawals, we can set that to be 0. So the constructor of my subclass is still responsible for setting all of the fields, and that includes any fields that are being inherited from the base class using this super, using this called a super to call the constructor of my base class. Are there any questions about what we've done so far? I'm going to pause here, let people catch up, ask questions real quick. Any questions? Yes? And the interest rates. Yep. Sorry, it's a little too much to fit all on one and all on the screen. I'm trying to, can't make this stuff any smaller, unfortunately. No, be careful. 500. So super is calling the constructor of the base class. So if I go look at my base class, I see I've got balance, number, owner, and minimum balance. So that's what these 4 values represent. And then I take care of the other fields after I call the constructor of the base class. This step is required, by the way. Calling super in your subclass is a required step. You always have to do that. Always. Any other questions before we try to implement some behaviors? Yeah. So take a look at your constructor in the account class. I made some changes to it, right? It doesn't have to look exactly like mine. In fact, I kind of hope you guys play around with it a little bit, experiment a little bit, make it your own. Check your constructor in your account class and make sure the values you're passing in match up with whatever you have your constructor listed. Yes? Oh, yeah, the data types. So it looks something like this. Yeah. Yeah, I won't like that. Any other questions? Any other questions before we take a look at some behavior stuff? Yes? It does have to be the first. That's correct. I'm not it's hard for me to say what that could be without seeing your code. Maybe an extra semicolon somewhere or missing brackets somewhere. Could be possible culprits, missing parentheses or something. So let's start taking a look at these behaviors. First thing I want to do is, talk about compounding interest. This is, I know, going to require a little bit of math, but it's really not that bad. So let's define a method to compound interest for us. What should the return type of this method be? Any suggestions? Void? That's fine with me, yeah. Compound interest. Any input parameters that I need for this guy? How often am I going to compound? So that is something we need to think about, right? However, this will just go ahead and, well, I guess it does. Let me think about that for a second. I suppose that does, it depends on how you interpret the interest rate. Is that an annual interest rate or is that an interest rate per term? Yeah, and then you'd have to divide by the number of periods or whatever to get the... Raise it to the exponent of the time period as well. Yeah, in that sense, so I guess you could make an argument for that being either a field or a parameter as well, right? The number of periods, how often am I compounding interest? You can make an argument for that being a field, perhaps, adding another field in here. That's probably, what, an integer? Usually in months, right? number of months. So that would be, or number of periods, I guess, another way to think about it. Or you could take it in as a parameter, I suppose, as well. Int periods. How many periods are there that we're compounding over? Let's just try it that way for now. If we don't like it, we can always change it later. And then this is just a math equation. To be honest with you, I don't remember what the math equation is. I have to look it up. So, help me, Google. There it is, right there. Principal times 1 plus r over n to the nt. So I need a little bit more explanation than that, actually. So I don't need t, I just need n. Number of times interest is compounded per year, the annual interest rate, and the principal, that's our current balance, right? The principal is how much is currently in there. So current balance times 1 plus r over n to the n power. All right, we could do this. It's just some math. I like to break this down into pieces. Let's do r over n first, perhaps. R is the interest rate, the annual interest rate. So I have that, right? That's a field that I can get. So I'll make a variable r over n equals this dot interest rate divided by periods. So that gets me r over n, right? That's one piece. Actually, I could go ahead and add 1 to that. I wanted to as well. So that takes care of everything inside the parentheses. Now I just have to multiply by the, actually let's do this part next. Take it to the n power. Take it to the n power. How do I do that? How do I take it to the n power? What's the technique there? Maybe you stumble across this from other exercises. Math.pow. Math.pow is the way to do it. Yeah. So I'll say r over n equals math.pow. The first one is the base, so that's going to be r over n, and the second one is the exponent, which is just going to be periods. And then finally, my last step is to take this value and multiply it by my current balance, and then set that back in. So how am I going to say that? How am I going to take this, multiply it by my current balance, and then put it back in? I'm sorry? Yeah, so that will get me the balance. I can say this dot get balance, right, times r over n. But then I need to put it back in. So how do I put it back in? How do I actually? I'm sorry? Well, I want to be careful. So where do I want this value to end up when I'm done? Where do I want this value to be? I want it to be in this dot balance, right? So can I say something like this? This dot balance equals. So it's a little unhappy with me for a couple of reasons. One is my fault. One I knew was going to happen. The other one I didn't, but that's okay. So the first error over here, it says type mismatch, cannot convert from double to float. So we've got I've got this double here, but if I go back to my account class, I see that everything else is a float, right? That's kind of annoying to mix those two, and that's my fault. I should have been consistent. So I think the way to solve that is to change this over to a float. Or I could have also changed everything else over to a double. Doesn't really matter. But they all need to be consistent. So that should hopefully fix that problem. What is balance? Is balance listed as a float? It is, yeah. Why is it still mad at me then? Oh, I see. No, wait a second. Why is it still mad at me? Float, float, float. Oh, this guy. I missed that one. Ah, well, we've got a domino effect here. It wants this one to be a double instead of a float. Really, all of these should be double. screwed this one up. I'm just going to change everything to be a double. So I can just actually, this is a good time to show you a nice technique for this. I don't want floats anymore. I want to change it. I've decided I want to change everything into doubles, which sounds annoying because I have to track down everywhere it says float and change it over to a double. Find replace is programmer's best friend. Oh my gosh. Love this tool. Use it all the time. Get to know it. Get to love it. I get to it by hitting Control F on the keyboard. I want to find the word float and I want to replace it with the word double. And I'm going to just go ahead and say replace all. And that'll take care of all of that for this file. I also need to go back to the account class and do the same thing over there. So I'm going to go back to my account class. I'm going to find all the floats and turn them into doubles. Replace all. And now, hopefully, it'll be happier. Let's see. What are you complaining about? Double int string int. So this is mad because it doesn't match my constructor here. I think I just need to save. No, we're good. We're good. An account, it's mad down here at the bottom. I'm not worried about this. We'll fix that later. I'm not worried about this. I've changed I have no more floats anywhere. Everything is a double now, and I used Control F to make that happen. Find replace. I still have one error here. This is actually the one I was more concerned about. Let me pause for a second because I know I just did a lot. I want to make sure everybody's with me on the same page. Are there any questions about what I just did? Yeah. Yeah, that's doubles are more precise. They're going to give you more accurate results. So to get a little bit more technical with it, a floating point value is half the size as a double value. So if a floating point value is 32 bits, a double will be 64 bits. That's where the name double comes from. It's twice as big. And because it's twice as big, that means it can give you a more accurate representation of the value. Yeah, that's why doubles are preferred, even though they take more space. It's not that much more space. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Right here. I took it in as a parameter. I decided to take it as a parameter. If you don't like that design decision, you are certainly entitled to not like that design decision. That is something you are allowed to do, right? If you want to make that a field instead, by all means, make it a field. You should know enough to set that up and make that happen if that's something that'll make you feel better. I'm not too worried about it right now, partially because next Tuesday we're going to change all of this anyway. So, is there another question? Yeah. That's actually was going to be my next question to you. Why is this mad at me? It's saying account.balance is not visible. It's not visible. But wait a second. This is an account, right? That's the whole thing with inheritance is I have access to all those fields, or do I? Or do I? They're all set as private, and private means private. Private is very much private. So when I mark something as private, I can only say this.balance inside of this file. That's it. That's the only place where that statement will work. This.balance is in this file. That's what private means, right? If I want it to be able to be accessed through inheritance, which is what I'm trying to do, I heard several people say I have to change it to say protected. So protected is somewhere in between public and private. Protected means that any subclasses can access this value, but any other classes still won't be able to access this value. So when I change this to, say, protected, if I go back, you see that that error is now gone. I can do what I want to do. So my excuse me, my compound interest method is now functional. So I think, yes. Is it better to do that than to use your setter? Yeah, so I get this question a lot. You know, should I use my setter for things, or should I, excuse me, should I access it through this dot balance? So here there is a distinction, right? A setter is oftentimes going to be marked with what access modifier? Public. It's often going to be public. Protected is not quite public, right? Protected still gives me some protection from the outside world. I can only exploit it through inheritance. I still can't access it otherwise. So if you have a setter, then you are welcome to use it, but I might not want to make this settable publicly to the outside world, right? In fact, if banks let people just dictate their own balances, we'd all be rich. So we do want to keep this somewhat private. We do want to make this private value, but we do want to allow access to it through inheritance. So marking this as protected, I think, is a better choice here. If you don't mind making something public, making a public setter for a value, then by all means use the setter. That's fine. Don't worry about protected, just use the setter. Not a problem. Great question. Any other questions? So the next thing I want to talk to you about is this idea of counting withdrawals. Counting withdrawals. So I have a withdrawal method. I have a withdrawal method here in my base class. It works. We've tested it. We've used it. It works. I don't really want to change this. This code is fine for withdrawing money. What I want to do is I want to count. I want to count the withdrawals as they occur, right? The problem is that I don't want to have to change. I don't want to have two different withdrawal methods. I don't want to have a method that's called withdraw and then another method called, you know, withdraw and count number of withdrawals or something like that. That's overkill. I want one way to withdraw from my account. I want one way in to withdraw money from my account. So I don't think I talked about this in the video, but I do want to talk to you about how I can actually use this code and still add in the additional stuff that I want to count the withdrawals that are taking place. So the way that that's going to work is I'll say something like this, public void withdraw. Now wait a second, that's the same name as the method that I had in my base class, right? Same name. I'm even going to go one step farther and say double amount as my parameter. It looks exactly the same, right? Actually, not exactly the same. I had a Boolean return type. Let me switch that up. Boolean return type. It looks exactly the same, right? I am not going to redefine all this code. I don't want to retype this stuff out. That is not what I want to do. As a programmer, I like to write code exactly once. I don't like to have copies of the same code float around. That's inefficient design. But there is a way that I can access code from my base class. Any idea? Any ideas of how I can access stuff from my base class? Super. Yeah, there we go. I was about to give you a hint, but you didn't need it. We already did it. We already did it in the constructor. So if I want to use the code, I should be able to say super.withdraw, right? And pass the amount in. That's going to call the withdraw method from my base class and do all the code that's already in there. And now, what do I have to do? I just have to add the extra stuff that I want. I just have to add in the extra stuff that I want to make it work, right? So I want to count withdrawals. That's actually a very easy thing to do. I just want to increment how many withdrawals have taken place. Actually, I need to do a little bit more than that. I need to check to see if I've already hit my maximum. Right? I can only do this if I haven't hit my maximum. So I need to check that first. So maybe something like if this dot current withdrawals is less than this dot max withdrawals, right? Then I can do the withdrawal. And what else do I need to do inside of here? I need to increment current withdrawals. That's easy. This dot current withdrawals plus plus. And we're in pretty good shape here there's just there's just one other issue that we need to worry about. Anybody know what that is? It's unhappy with me right now. Yeah. Yeah, so we have to worry about, well, what happens if withdrawal comes back false? Yeah, so we've got this return type issue to deal with, and we also have the issue of what happens if this fails, right? So actually, maybe what we should do, so I don't want to increase this if the withdrawal failed, right? I don't want to count up if the withdrawal didn't go through. So maybe what I should do is I should grab the result of this guy and stash it in a variable. I can do that, right? I can say Boolean results equals. So that'll tell me then whether this worked or not. And I only want to do this if this worked. I only want to do this if that worked. So how am I going to do that? I just need another if statement. Need another if statement in here. If results, or if you want to be very explicit about it, you could put this in. Not necessary to do so, but you can stick that in there. Right? But I still have to return something here as well. I still have to return something here. So what do I want to return? What do I want my return value to be from this? I still have to give back this Boolean value. What am I going to return? I'm going to return result. So inside of here, I can just say return result. But what if I don't have it? What if I've already hit my max withdrawals? Then what? Then I can just return false. So down here at the bottom, I'll say return false. And we're good. Everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. So just to recap what we did here, I wanted to add in this withdrawal counting, but I didn't want to have to redo all the stuff that I had over here for withdrawing money. This code is good. I didn't want to have to redo all that stuff. I wanted to use it. So I used this super to call the method from my base class and use the code that I already have, and then I just added in the extra code to do the stuff that I wanted. That's extra. Does that make sense? Again, the goal here is maximum code reusability. That's something that inheritance provides for us. I can reuse the code as much as possible and just tack on new stuff whenever I need to. Right? Any questions? What questions can I answer for you? So I got about 20 minutes left. Fortunately, I'm concerned that that won't be quite enough time to do what I wanted to do, which is implement the checking account. I wanted to do that as well. But I also wanted to talk about polymorphism, too, is the other thing. So let me think what the best use of this next 20 to 30 minutes would be. Tell you what, let's go ahead and do the checking account, because I think it'll actually go pretty quick. I think it'll go pretty quickly. And then that should still give us some time to talk about polymorphism. So we already did this once, so I think you guys should be able to lead me through the next phase, which is creating this checking account. I'm going to go create a new class called checking account. What's my first step? I'm going to let you guys drive. What's my first step? I need to extend my base class again. Okay? What's my next step? Fields. What fields do we need for checking accounts? So what are some of the differences we said between checking account and savings account? Minimum balance, that's pretty easy to take care of. We don't need anything extra for that. I guess overdraft was kind of what we were getting at. So if you have overdraft, you have to pay extra for that overdraft protection, right? You have to pay extra for that. So maybe we should have something that indicates whether they have it or not, whether they decided to spring for the overdraft protection or not. What would that look like? What kind of field would that be? Probably a Boolean? Sure. Private Boolean overdraft protection. just to keep things simple and also for the sake of time, I think I'm just going to leave it at that for now, right? In terms of let's do the constructor next. What is this constructor? Oops, it helps if I spell it correctly. What is this constructor going to look like? What do I need for my constructor here? I need all the ones from, well, actually, it's going to look kind of like this savings account constructor, except I don't have an interest rate. So I need the balance, the number, and the owner. I need those three for sure. So let me just go ahead and copy those in. Do I need any other parameters to my checking account? I need the overdraft protection, right? I need the overdraft protection. So Boolean overdraft. Okay, what's next? What's my next step? Super. So I call super, and I plug in those values. Balance, number, owner. For a minimum balance on your checking account, that's usually pretty small, like really small, like $5. It's usually really, really small. And the last, actually that's it. That's all I need for that one, right? What else do I need to do inside of my constructor here? I need to set the overdraft protection. So this dot overdraft equals overdraft protection. Okay. In terms of behaviors, what do I need to think about in terms of behaviors for this guy? So let's just keep the overdraft thing simple. If I do overdraw my account, right? If I do overdraw my account, then I just want to charge them a fee if they don't have overdraft protection. If they do have overdraft protection, then I'm just going to let it slide. Let's say that, right? So in terms of behaviors, what would I need to do to make something like that happen? What behaviors are affected by overdraft protection? Withdrawal. It's kind of like what we saw for our savings account. So I would need to modify withdrawal. I need to modify my withdrawal method similarly to how we did it over here. I'm actually going to leave that as an exercise for you to think about. I'm not going to do that one right now. But you could take a similar approach to what we did over here. Try to reuse as much of the code as possible, right? Or actually, in this case, since we're letting them go into the negative, we're letting them go into the red as part of overdraft, potentially. Maybe you don't want to reuse this code. Maybe you just need to redo withdrawal from scratch. You can do that. That is allowed. You can actually create a new version of withdrawal that only applies to my checking account. Yes? Mm-hmm. That is something that it certainly would be possible. I'm not going to do that right now because the amount of work that it would take, I think, is more than what I have time for. But I think it's a very interesting exercise for you to do. It would involve linking accounts, right? I would have to have two accounts that are linked to the same person, which is absolutely doable, but probably more time than we have to do right now. So I would encourage you to try that out, and if you get stuck, flag me down or flag somebody else down. I'd be happy to work on that one with you. Play around with it a little bit, see what you can come up with. Where would that have to go? Where would that kind of code have to, what would you have to do to link those up? How would that work? We can talk about it conceptually a little bit. It'd be part of the bank, right? It'd be part of the bank. So I'd have to have some way of mapping who owns what account. I have the owners, right? I have the owners here inside of my accounts. So maybe I could just check to see if they own another account that has enough money and pull from that one, right? If they overdraft their account, that's one way you could do it. Or you might want to make it more explicit. You might want to make it such that if I give you somebody's name, you can tell me they have this account, this account, this account, this account, right? Just right off the bat. Boom, boom, boom. You should be able to do that. You should be able to make that happen. It should be something you can implement. But I'm gonna leave that one up to you guys in terms of implementing the withdrawal, to take in the overdrafting, and perhaps linking up accounts based on person, based on who owns them. What I want to spend the last 10 to 15 minutes talking about is actually going back to this bank class and thinking about what changes we might need to make here based on the decisions that we made with our checking and savings accounts. So if you remember last time, right, we have this bank account that allows us to, excuse me, to create and manage accounts. You see, we've got an error based on some stuff that we've changed. I look at this create account method. Is this accurate still? Is this what we want to do still? Clearly we have an error, but even if we fix that error, is this how we want to do it now? Is this how we want to do it now? I need to be more specific. Do I want to open a checking account? Do I want to open a savings account? What kind of account do I want? In fact, I probably am not going to be creating accounts of this type anymore at all, which sounds a little strange at first. I have this class, but I'm never going to actually create these specifically, right? I'm only going to create the subclasses. But the subclasses are really what I want, because they have the more specific, the more well-defined behaviors, whereas this is more general. This is a much more general account class. So instead of just having one method called create account, I need to be more specific now. I need to say create savings account, and I need to have another method for create checking account. Right? And they might look fairly similar, honestly. Or, actually, I started typing this out, and I got this really bad feeling on the inside. Got this really bad feeling, because if I was going to do what I started to do here, what would end up happening? I'd be copy-pasting some stuff, and that just, it just doesn't feel good. Just like every fiber of my being wants to not do that, right? So maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a better way. Can you think of maybe an alternative approach that involves, yeah, taking a parameter that indicates what kind of account we're trying to open, right? What type of would that parameter be? Any ideas? Could use a string. Enum, I think, is a little overkill. Could it work? Yeah, sure. A little overkill. How many choices do we have? 2. Boolean, yeah. Whenever you have 2 choices, Boolean. Simple to use, perfect way to go. So let me change this back to how I had it before. I'm just going to say create account. I'll add a new parameter on here, Boolean, and I'll call it is checking. So if it's true, that means I'm creating a checking account. If it's false, that means I'm not creating a checking account, I'm creating a savings account. Simple enough, right? Simple enough. So then down here, I'll need to change some things. I don't want to do this anymore. This is not what I want to do anymore. Instead, I need to do what? What's my first step down here now? I need to determine which one I'm creating and then use the exact constructor. So an if statement should do it, right? If is checking, then I want to call checking, right? I want to call a checking account. Otherwise, I want to call savings account. So a good way to do this might be to do something like this. Whoops. Let me think about how I want to approach this here. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to leave this blank for a second. Let's create a checking account. Let's create a checking account. I want to put it into a variable. So I'm going to say checking account A equals new checking account. And then I have to provide all the stuff, right? I have to provide all the stuff that they have given to me. So you see I've got, oh, that's the wrong file, sorry. Checking account. I have to provide the balance, the number, the owner, and for a checking account I need overdraft protection. So I have the balance, I have the number, I have the owner. I need to provide overdraft protection. Where's that going to come from? So that's not an easy question to answer. Not an easy question to answer. Where is that going to come from? What are my options? What are my options? I could just hard code something in. I could just say true, right? That's an option. In fact, that's probably what I'm going to do. I know it's not very satisfying. Probably not what I'm going to. It's probably what I'm going to end up doing for this example. I want you to think about though what a better solution to this would be. I could take it in as a parameter, right? I could do this. Boolean overdraft. This seems like it might be a viable option, but what's the downside of this? If I'm creating a savings account, then it doesn't matter. I don't need it. So I've got this extra thing here, and how do I fill that out? I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. So if you run into that problem, that kind of speaks to maybe doing what I was going to do originally, which is making two separate methods, one for checking accounts and one for savings accounts. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe that's the right design choice here. I want you to make that design choice. I want you to start making these kinds of decisions, thinking about the implication of those decisions and implementing one of those for yourself. To keep things moving, I'm just going to hard code in true. Everybody gets free overdraft protection. Hooray. Right? We all get overdraft protection. Otherwise, I want to create a savings account. So I'll say savings account A equals new savings account. And I have to do the same thing where I need to pass in all the appropriate values. I've got balance, number, string, and here I've got an interest rate. Here I've got an interest rate. It's the same problem that we have with the overdraft protection. Where does that come from? I'm going to hard code it in, but you should think about that problem. Think about how you would solve this problem from a design perspective. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and hard code it in. So balance, account num, owner, and what is the current interest rate? It's really ridiculously, I mean, it might as well be 0. 0.25, like that. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. We just need to give it something. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions so far. I've got one final thing that I want to talk to you guys about to kind of wrap up our discussion today. I still want to make sure that after I create this account, it gets added to my list of accounts, right? But wait a second. I have this type listed as account here. Is that okay? Is that all right? Can I do that? Can I add a savings account to this list that contains accounts? I can. I absolutely can. Yes, absolutely. Why? Because they're a subclass. A savings account is an account, right? A savings account is an account. A checking account is an account. So if I use the base class here in my list, that allows the list to hold both of them. I can give it either one. Anything that inherits from that base class can go inside of this array list. With that being said, it might be useful for me to have a separate list of just checking accounts. That might be something that's useful for me, in which case I certainly could create another list that contains only the checking accounts. And I could create another list that contains only the savings accounts. But the main point I wanted to reiterate here is that it's possible for me to put both into the same list because they both inherit from the same base class. That's polymorphism. That's polymorphism in action. That's an advantage that polymorphism gets us, is that if it's convenient for me to do so, I can treat things as if they are from their base class. Now, that being said, if I pull something out of this array list, let's say later on, I come back to this array list and I pull out one of these objects. What can I do to that object? What are the possible things that I can do to that object? Do I know whether it's a checking account or a savings account? Can I find out? Anybody have any ideas? That's where things get a little tricky. When I pull something out of this list, I don't know if it's a checking account or a savings account. All I know is that it's an account. That's all that I know. So what can I do to it? I can only do the stuff that's inside of the account class. Maybe it's actually a checking account. Maybe it's actually a savings account and I want to compound interest on it. I don't know that it's a savings account. All I know is that it's an account. So it will not let me compound interest on it. If I want to compound interest on it, if I'm absolutely sure that the thing that I'm looking at is a savings account and I want to compound interest on it, I can change it over. What's the mechanism for changing types of stuff? Casting. I can cast it to the more specific type and then use whatever methods that I want. But I better be darn sure that that thing is actually a savings account. Because if it's a checking account and I try to convert it into a savings account, explosions, right? Bad news for everybody. The whole thing comes to a screeching halt. It will not be happy. Nothing will work. So that's sort of the downside of polymorphism, right? The other question I asked is there a way for me to figure out whether something's a savings account or a checking account? And the answer to that question is yes. There's actually multiple ways to do this. However, I think the best way is to remove all doubt and keep separate lists. If that is something that is important to you to know for a fact whether something's a checking account or a savings account, then keep a separate list of checking accounts, just checking accounts, and a separate list of just savings accounts, and do it that way. Is it possible for me to give you an account and figure out what it actually is? Yes. I think it's bad design, though. I think a better design is to remove all doubt and just make it clear. Over here, I've got my pile of all accounts. Over here, I've got my pile of checking accounts. Over here, I've got my pile of savings accounts. But just to, well, my computer's telling me that I need to shut up. Just to wrap this up, we haven't actually completed this yet, so let's complete this method. Let's get this method finished, and then we'll call it a day. How do I actually put this thing in? Can I say A here? Will that work? I mean, you can tell. No, it won't. It won't work. So, was this what you're suggesting, just stick it inside of both? So that would work. That would work. However, got that nasty feeling again. This nasty feeling that happens whenever I copy paste code. Ooh. Nope. That's gonna give me nightmares. I can't do it. Can't do it. There's another way. There's another way. We can use our good friend polymorphism one last time to help us out. Make this a little bit cleaner. A checking account is an account. A savings account is an account. So maybe what I need to do is I need to declare something that's an account. Initialize it inside of my if statement, and then add it into the list. This is polymorphism. I'm declaring a variable called A. What's the type of that variable? I'm saying it's an account. Down here, I say, this is actually a checking account. This is actually a savings account. But wait a second, I declared A as neither a checking account or a savings account. I declared it as just an account. But that's okay. That's all right. Polymorphism allows us to do this. Polymorphism allows us to make this happen. And then down here at the bottom, I just add it into the array list. No problem. No problem. Are there any questions about this? This stuff is pretty confusing the first few times you do it. It's going to take practice. It's going to take practice. Thankfully, I gave you a studio today that should hopefully help you out with some of these issues. I think you're going to be creating a quiz today, if I remember correctly. We'll be creating some quizzes today. I'm going to wrap it up, however, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, why are you mad at me? Oh, so it's doing exactly what I didn't want to do. It's actually making me a liar. It says I can't convert from checking account to account, except I can. How do I fix this? I was actually off. I was just a little bit off. How do I fix this? How do I change something from one side to another? I have to cast it, yeah. I was so close, but not quite there. It looked like it worked, but then it decided to stop working. Well, mine wants me to cast it for some reason. I don't know why, but it really wanted me to. And actually, it's not doing it for this one, surprisingly. That's even more confusing to me. Why is it only making me do it for the top one, not the bottom one? I must have screwed something up somewhere along the way. I thought it would work without the typecast. That's a little strange. See, now it's happy. I don't know. I'm not gonna touch it. I'm just gonna let it sit the way that it is. Any questions for me before I get off the stage? Yes. Scroll to the right. Absolutely. Yes. Let me move this guy out of the way, actually, and try to get as much stuff in there as I can. That's almost all of it. This is the end up here. So there's that method. Any other questions? Yes. You know what? That might be why it was. Well, no, that's not. Couldn't have been why. I do. Yes, I should have changed it in this class as well. Yes, absolutely. Any other questions? I will of course post this code like I've been doing the entire time. We've only got one session after this, actually. One more session after this on Tuesday. We're going to mess around with this just a little bit more. Talk about interfaces on Tuesday, just to give you kind of heads up about what's coming on down the line. If there aren't any more questions, you've got a studio to work on about quizzes, or if you're working on any of the stuff in the last section, the PSET or whatever, let me know. I'll help you out however I can. Jesse, are you? Yeah, you ready? 5 minutes? No. 10 minutes?
Some amount of time.
Some amount of time. Well, I'm done. So some amount of time, Jesse will be up here to answer any questions about the WebTrack stuff.